everybody. This is Ryan McClanahan with historythroughcards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. So, I'm going to tell you the story of Lord Carnarvon. And actually, I'm going to show you a better picture than this because my camera doesn't like sports cards or non sports cards now, too. This is a 1906 Odgen's, let me get this correct, owners, racing colors, and jockeys. And Steve Donahue, who's a really famous jockey, is also on this card too. I actually didn't know that uh, Lord Carnarvon had a card until years ago, and this was a very difficult card to track down. In fact, I've actually never seen this card before in person. I've seen maybe a few of them online, but I had to go to France, or my credit card went to France. In fact, my credit card has gone everywhere that I haven't, apparently. So, I'm going to tell you the story of Lord Carnarvon here. And if you're not familiar with Lord Carnarvon, he was the backer of Howard Carter in his expedition to find uh, King Tutankhamun. And I'm going to go through all of that. And he's actually the first one to pass away. And I don't want to ruin it for you. I know he's passed away, but I don't want to ruin the story for you. So I'm actually going to read two different articles, and they're somewhat long. So if you want to, go get a cup of coffee or two or three, go ahead, and here's the story. This is from the New York Herald, Thursday, December 21st, 1922. On the edge of civilization, on the western bank of the Nile, near Luxor, some 5 miles in length and about a mile and a quarter deep, lies the necropolis of ancient Thebes. Here the arid plains and foothills are everywhere dotted with burial pits, with a royal mortuary temple here and there, while mingled among the relics of ancient days stand the mud houses of the modern inhabitants. The limestone cliffs, which in certain parts reach a height of 500 feet or more, are also honeycombed with an endless succession of destroyed and plundered tombs. In this area, some of the greatest, richest, and most powerful inhabitants of ancient Egypt were buried. Hence, this cemetery has been a happy hunting ground for generations of native robbers. At the northerly end of this vast cemetery, by following a winding track road about 2.5 miles leading in a southwesterly direction, we come to the most celebrated portion of the Theban necropolis. This is the Valley of the Kings, or in Arabic, Biban el Molek. For centuries, the spot had been visited by countless travelers, archaeologists, and tourists. The most universal opinion of archaeologists and of Sir G. Maspero, director of the Cairo Museum, was that this locality was practically exhausted. As far as was known, the only king's tomb missing were those of Thutmose II, the somewhat shadowy king, Semenkhara, and Tutankhamun. Earlier pharaohs' tombs were still to be found, and there are in the valley several open and plundered tombs to which a name cannot be given. However, Howard Carter, the American Egyptologist, and my associate still thought that there was at least a chance of finding some great dignitary, if nothing else, and the government having given me a more favorable concession than it granted the previous excavators, we decided to start excavating at once. During the war, in the intervals between Carter's military work at Cairo, he managed to dig a little every year, but it was only this autumn that I received a cable telling me that he had at last struck something promising, a tomb closed and sealed. Arriving at Luxor, we at once started operations. A staircase of some 18 steps had first to be cleared. While we were doing this, various damaged objects, such as pottery and broken wood flowers, were found. At the bottom of the staircase, we came upon a wall covered with seals. Some bore the name Tut Akhenamen, while others were the royal seal on which above is discernible. It then became apparent that the tomb had certainly been opened, if not plundered, in ancient days, and had been resealed by officials of the necropolis. After affixing a wooden griddle over the door, a task that took all day, we proceeded to clear the passage. This was blocked with stones and rubbish right up to the ceiling. It is quite easy to see now where the robber entered. Along the passage, which is 9 meters in length, various objects were found. A broken box with the names Kutantan, Samankara, his wife being possibly the most important piece. Broken pottery, a few bits of broken jewelry, water skins, flowers, and other odd and ends were recovered from the rubbish. At the end of the now cleared passage, another sealed door was visible. After taking a photograph, we decided to take down a small portion of it. This was done, and by the uncertain light of a candle, a wonderful sight was exposed to our excited eyes. Gilt couches, boxes, and all sorts of other objects were visible in the dim light. Luckily, just above us was a large tomb of Ramses VI. This is a favorite tourist tomb and is lit by electric light. Having tapped the wire and charged the opening, we were able to enter and examine by electric light what proved to be the first chamber. We at first thought that our find was a hiding place of cash, where we should find some royal or semi-royal mummies hidden there to save them from the sacrilegious hands of robbers. But the more we examined the contents of the first chamber, the more convinced we became that it was the tomb of Tutankhamun. First things one noticed against the wall facing the door were three gigantic carved gilt wood beds. The end of the bed having carved heads, one head in particular with large ivory tongue and teeth, looking most weird. Upon these beds were draped chairs, boxes, smaller carved couches, and some wonderful sticks, wonderfully carved and inlaid. Some of the boxes were made of ebony, inlaid with ivory and covered with inscriptions. Others were inlaid with gold and porcelain. Beneath the central couch were heaped 20 to 30 wooden boxes containing mummified legs of mutton, ducks, geese, and venison. Between two of the couches I noticed four of the most beautiful alabaster vases ever found. In fact, I may say that nothing to touch them ever came to light before. They were vases on a stand with lotus flowers dropping out of their mouth and are carved out of solid block of alabaster. They stand 30 inches high. Beneath another of the beds was a chair of state or throne of a king. This is one of the most wonderful Egyptian works of art ever found, if not quite the most wonderful. On the back is a picture of a king and queen represented in well-known style. All of the figures on this chair are carved in carnelian, lazuli, turquoise, and other semi-precious stones, and are inlaid with gilded wood. The sun throws its rays over the king and queen as if to protect them. A little further on we came across a wooden head and bust of the king, probably a model of the king's head and shoulders upon which to try the royal wigs. Against the wall was the most beautiful portrait of the king. Everywhere there was a mass of boxes, some opened and plundered, others seemingly untouched. At the present moment, owing to the profusion of articles, we have no notion of the thousandth part of the contents even of this chamber. Moving on a little further, we found four chariot bodies of gilt wood, inlaid with semi-precious stones. Wheels were in a heap on the side, while the poles were stacked against the walls. At the other end of the chamber, there was a charming box with a painting on it of the king hunting lions and gazelles. This contains robes of the pharaoh. At the northern end, the first thing that strikes our eyes are two life-size portrait statues of the king in Bermudanized wood. The features are most delicately carved. On his brow is the crown of Egypt, and around his neck is a gilt collar, the emblem of royalty. He is clad in a shenty, a sort of stiff kilt. One hand holds a long gilt stick, while the other clasped a somewhat menacing manner a gilt mace. His bare feet, which are most exquisitely carved and molded, are shod with gold sandals. By this time the arousance of any coffin had made us feel that in all probability the tomb was not a cache, as I had first thought, but the actual burial place of the king. After another examination beneath the furthest southerly couch, we discovered a small hole in the wall. Looking through this hole, as an astounding scene of confusion was visible. Tables, chairs, beds, boxes, alabaster statues, vases, all jumbled together and piled on top of each other, in some places quite 5 feet high. It was quite impossible to make a closer examination without doing harm, and had we tried to enlarge the hole, it is possible that the wall would have come down upon our heads, as most of it was hanging, not supported by anything more than cement, that is, as far as we could see. Further careful scrutiny of the first chamber revealed to us that at the northern end, between two statues of the king, the wall had been plastered over, and the entrance again covered with the royal cartouche and the seal of the necropolis. In one place, a robber had made a small hole and evidently had entered, and the hole had been carefully plastered up and sealed by inspectors. In all probability, behind that wall we shall come to the funerary chamber of King Tut Akhenamen, and should be fortunate enough to find his sarcophagus and coffins unencumbered. Then those privileged to be present will look upon a sight that has never been witnessed by any living person. Although the contents of the outer chamber are certainly not in their original untouched state, for the two outer chambers bear somewhat the aspect of a house entered by burglars, yet I think that we shall find that is missing is these tombs consist for the most part of gold and silver bowls, vases, and jewelry that formed a great part of the funerary equipment of the Egyptian kings. In some cases, the gold plating has been wrenched from various articles. Still, the quantity of objects we have seen in the first two chambers is quite extraordinary. We have been indeed fortunate to strike the period of Egyptian art that, for grace and originality of workmanship, was never surpassed. It should be remembered that in this king's reign we see the best artwork of the Amara school and Theban art at its highest pitch. It is quite impossible to realize the perfection and beautifully graced work of some objects. Such exquisite taste and finish have scarcely been dreamed of, much less seen, and there still remains much to be learned about the romantic period of Kuenaten, the so-called heretic king who changed the worship of Egypt from a multiplicity of gods to that of a single one, Aten, or the rays of the sun. From the mass of the material on hand, it is hoped that from some of the papyri which lie in one of the numerous boxes we may obtain most valuable information of the period that is not only somewhat mysterious, but particularly fascinating. I do not suppose any former finds ever exceeded this discovery in magnitude. When Marriott discovered the celebrated Serapeum of Saqqarah, he speaks of the invincible emotion which overcame upon him entering those mysterious caverns. I do not suppose his feelings were any more poignant than ours when we suddenly realized what we had found. In conclusion, I must say that the most credit for the discovery is due to my friend Howard Carter, who, after many seasons of failure and disappointment, I got more and more despondent, bucked me up and persuaded me to go on excavating until he had related his theories. He proved right and at last brought the work to a successful issue. Before the Christian era, Greek travelers were in the habit of going to the Valley of the Kings, some inscribing their names on the walls. While allusions are made to these tombs by ancient Greek historians, there is little doubt that many of these tombs, especially those of the Ramesside kings, were always visible, as the vast size of their doors and decorations over the lintels make it almost impossible to believe that these burial places were hidden beneath rocks, and dust. We are told that in the Ramesside times, the robbing of these sepulchres attained such scandalous proportions that a commission was formed to examine and report. Apparently, some of these thieves were caught and suitably punished. A list of the tombs visited and examined is given, but curiously enough, the tomb of Tut Akhenaten is not mentioned. The kings of the 18th dynasty seem to exercise a certain care in concealing their last resting places. The opening of the tomb was smaller and could not have been so apparent as those of the 19th and 20th dynasties and their successors. In 1913, we found the wholly plundered tomb of Amenhotep. This was situated on a plateau far away from the royal valley. So cunningly was it hidden that you could pass within a few yards of the opening and not yet perceive that there was a tomb anywhere near. In these cases, it is customary to remove all chips to some distance in order not to arouse suspicion. Still, I have no doubt that even in the late Egyptian times, all the royal tombs were known to the cemetery officials. All certainly have been opened and heavily plundered, but the tomb of Tut Akhenaten is without doubt by far the least disturbed that has ever yet been found or probably ever will be. In modern times, that is the beginning of the 19th century, Belzoni, Champollion, Domitian, Lepelus, Saxavelli, Laureate, Davis, and others have all excavated there. Some of these archaeologists were successful, while others had little to show for their labor. Although Howard Carter and myself had been working there systematically for 8 seasons until this fall, we formed a part of the latter class. The most successful excavator in late years has been Theodore Davis of Boston, who started to work there about 1901 under the direction of Carter, who was then inspector of antiquities in Upper Egypt. After Carter resigned the inspectorate, the work still carried on by Davis under the supervision of various times of Messrs. Quibel, Ariadon, Arton, Hones, and Burton. Davis for the first few years was brilliantly successful. Scarcely a season passed without his researchers being rewarded by rich finds. Tutmosis IV, Hatshepsut, Catches, Urethula, King Kublai were a few of the successes that fell to his lot. His last discovery is the painted tomb of Horemheb. A description of this was published under the title of The Tomb of Horemheb and Tut Akhenaten. The reason for this title being that he found a few objects belonging to the latter king in the Horemheb tomb. It was in the year 1914 that Davis gave up his concession to dig in the locality. He had for the last 4 or 5 years been singularly unsuccessful. In return to his very real services, the Egyptian government gave him many fine and interesting objects, some of which have been presented to the Boston Museum. So I've always been really interested in Egypt and archaeology and Egyptology, and I actually think that there's a much older civilization in Egypt that predates the ancient Egyptians, probably going back to at least 10,000, 12,000 years or so. And we know this because certain things don't exactly make sense. And what I mean is that underneath Egypt, they're finding a civilization that they don't know anything about. And these are actually normal, regular, everyday people that are digging in their basements or underneath Egypt, and they're finding all these incredible things that really shouldn't be there. And again, we don't know who these people are. Uh, anyway, it's not really unusual to find a completely unknown civilization or culture. We found them before all throughout the world, and it just kind of leads down one rabbit hole into another rabbit hole. And I really don't want to kind of get into it, although I do because I really love the subject. Um, what really kind of stopped me from becoming an Egyptologist is that Indiana Jones is not real. Oh man, I tell you. Um, actually, being an Egyptologist or an archaeologist, it's kind of not fast paced for me. In fact, I kind of view what I do here as kind of like archaeology, but with cardboard, because there's so many different layers to our sports cards, and history behind those sports cards, like this one, or non-sports, I should say, um, that a lot of times like we don't know. And in fact, sometimes like I'm finding out things that I didn't know either. And it's one of the reasons why I collect cards, and not just for the artwork or for the ball players or the non-sports stuff. So I'm also learning things, and you know the thing is, you should learn something new every day, and I figured this is a great way to do that. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know what you think in your comments below. I always appreciate your comments and hearing what you guys have to say, and I'm pretty decent at responding to all your comments anyway. So, guys, thank you very much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it. And I will talk to you again in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.